Well, our next guest says that lack of supply when it comes to housing isn't the only factor we should be focusing on. Joining us now is Paul Kershaw, founder of Generation Squeeze. Paul, there's so much going on when it comes to housing this week. But today in particular, we did get the news from the federal government that they're going to be removing this GST from the construction of rental housing, calling on provinces to do the same, to remove their PST or HST, what have you. Approaching or targeting rental housing in this way, how successful do you think that could be in, increasing affordability across the board?
Well, let's be clear. Today is a really important day for affordability and housing in Canada. Yesterday was important, too, with the announcement that the Accelerator Fund is really getting going. So what we're seeing is that more than ever before, the federal government is using its spending power to help municipalities resist NIMBYism, which can get in the way of their urgently adding density in land already zoned for residences. And you just heard the mayor in Calgary talking about how they're now actively trying to get the biggest share of federal funding they can by increasing the density they permit as a right. How important is that? That's great news. And then to take away, to give an extra tax subsidy to build purpose-built rental, that matters now, perhaps especially given that higher interest rates do make the financing of new builds more complicated. But there's such a sweet spot here by subsidizing new purpose-built rental buildings. We're not just relying on sort of blanket low interest rates, which then allow people to not only borrow money to build new construction, but we tend in Canada to borrow money to bid up the price of existing housing. And that has been a big part of our challenge. And we still need our politicians to be focusing on how so much of the unaffordability we see is that the existing housing that already exists in our communities is getting bid up and bid up and bid up by people like me when I want to move, because I've gained wealth in my home already. And so I can use that extra wealth to outcompete a first-time aspiring home buyer. And we need to break that vicious cycle. And so I'm keen to hear what Mr. Trudeau will say on that front next, as well as Mr. Poilievre. Is
there some way that you envision that they could actually be able to target that, to break that cycle?
Well, first off, we just need to acknowledge that as important as additional supply is, we can't just have a goal for, we want X million more units, or in a particular city, X thousand more units. We need to also say, what do we want for home prices? And this is what's so fundamentally important. We've kind of had politicians resisting that they want home prices to stall, because we need to break that addiction that, many homeowners now in Canada, they don't just go and buy homes to live in. They're also becoming, 1 in 6 of us has become like amateur landlords. We're buying second and third and fourth investment properties. And that's using our wealth windfalls to outbid again people who want to use housing for homes. And then they're locked out of ownership. And we're saying, hey, you pay my mortgage, I'll gain the wealth windfall and the equity from paying off my mortgage. You get nothing. And so if we now say we don't want home prices to rise going forward, we can discourage that kind of investment in existing housing that's bidding up the prices. There's a range of policy tools we need to pull to achieve that goal. But in the absence of having that goal, we weren't really getting anywhere.
Should investors be discouraged from, buying an extra condo to rent out?
Well, I do think we want to more and more be driving investors to be investing in purpose-built rental, or if they're not doing that, take their money and go invest in some other industry that is, making the next green technology that's going to make us an efficient, thriving economy that is sustainable. But when people are using their investments to try and, get wealth windfalls in the housing market, most of the stuff it's available for them to bid on has already been built. And so they're not actually making something new. They're just inflating the value of an asset that already existed. It doesn't improve the roof, didn't make the kitchen nicer. It just makes it all more expensive. And so we need to discourage that kind of investment. We need housing to be first and foremost for homes, and investments only secondarily.
Right. So instead of thinking about housing as an investment at all, but I guess, that does sound like some sort of a tax or something might have to be in place that, in order for people to not try to pursue that. Unless house prices were just to stabilize and stop going up, then that could also discourage people from, trying to seek that out.
So I think something happened really importantly yesterday. For the first time, I actually heard our prime minister say out loud in response to a question from a reporter saying, we don't want home prices to keep rising. That's never really been said before by a political leader. Like, kudos to the prime minister. He deserves a great deal of credit for being politically brave, because that seemed like a bit of a third rail political issue. Touch it and you die. I think it's amazing we actually had our prime minister be brave enough to say, going forward, that has to be the goal. And if we can use that goal to then disrupt people's expectation that, in Canada, home prices are going to just constantly be rising. If we hear no, that's not our goal, and we're going to use every policy tool to discourage that, then you can incentivize, regardless of what tax policies you may or may not use. You can just incentivize people to say, housing, existing real estate isn't going to be the place where I make the best return on my investment potentially going forward, because that's not what they're aiming for. And that will drive me to go invest in some good new industry or business. And that will actually ultimately get us better productivity gains, start driving people's earnings higher and higher. And then that will ultimately then help to bridge the gap between home prices, if they stall, and our earnings have a chance to catch up.